Yes, we can. Thank you, Claire.
You can see them though, can you? So I don't need to share?
No.
I think if you can share your screen, the other
We
delegates,
can't see the PowerPoint. We can't.
online delegates
Okay.
can't see it. So if we can.
Right, all right, then give me a few minutes to change my setup and I can do that. I can't actually share, so I'm not allowed to share. You'd have to give me permission to share my PowerPoint.
We can ask the gentleman to give you the authority to share, please, gentlemen, on Zoom.
Yeah, no, I can. There we go. And that means that I will be reading from paper as well, and I think somehow has to change the slides in the main room. But thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. Looking through the agenda for this conference, it's brilliant to see something that's so all-encompassing, clearly reflecting that understanding that a nation brand or a city or a place brand is the sum of so many parts. And I know that's why Solly puts together such a great agenda. At City Nation Place, through our website content and our events, we bring together all of the experts who are leading and advising on place brand strategies around the world. So I think Solly asked me along today to share some of the perspectives that we've picked up from those experts. And the first question I've been asked to look at is how city, nation and place brands have been affected by COVID-19. I can hear myself now, it's amazing. So I think we need to start with some data, and I'm indebted to two of our valued sponsor partners for sharing some very fresh data from some recent global studies. The Anhalt Ipsos Nations Brand Index, or MBI for short, has 100 respondents in 20 countries, so 20,000 respondents from all around the world, all adults and weighted to reflect the key demographics of the 2020 online population of that country. I have moved on to the next slide in case somebody needs to do that in the room. Between July the 7th and August the 31st this year, Ipsos asked respondents for their overall opinion of how a list of countries handles healthcare crises such as COVID or Ebola or Zika on a scale from very favourable to very unfavourable. And Ipsos has aggregated the results for all of the 50 measured countries into the 6 regions: Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, Middle East and North America. Respondents' attitudes to how the countries of Africa handled healthcare crises remains mostly neutral, although more are unfavourable than favourable. And let's see who feels favourable and who feels unfavourable towards the response of African countries to healthcare crises. Respondents from Africa feel very favourable towards their own continent's response, but perceptions globally are markedly less favourable. There's a good deal of neutrality, and the respondents from Europe are more likely to feel unfavourable towards African countries in terms of how they handle health crises. But how does this translate into intentions to visit Africa? The MBI survey asked about travel planning for the next 5 years. How comfortable do you feel about visiting the following countries based on how they respond to health crises? And again, the responses to the countries have been aggregated by region. African countries had the fewest number of respondents saying that they would feel comfortable about visiting, and the greatest saying that they would feel uncomfortable. Generally, I hope the slides are keeping up in the room. Sorry, I realise I keep forgetting to say to change the slides. Generally, more respondents from the different regions felt uncomfortable versus comfortable, and Europeans appeared to be most uncomfortable about future travel to Africa. But on the bright side, there's still quite a high number of neutrals, which suggests that now is the time to influence those opinions in the right direction. So I'm going to change my slide again and look at this first slide from another of our partners, Bloom Consulting. Bloom, this is a very detailed slide, so I'm going to explain how it works. Bloom have been looking at how COVID-19 has created negative and positive perceptions of different countries according to global opinion. They track global opinion towards cities and towards nation brands through their digital country index, their country branding report, and their digital city index as well. During this pandemic, everybody's been talking about the R0, which is the ideal rate of zero infection spread. So Bloom have introduced the concept of brand naught to measure nation brand resilience, taking into account the pre-existing strength of the brand and how it's been impacted positively or negatively by the country's response to COVID, or at least to what's being said about the country's response to COVID, very much in terms of what's being said on social media and on the media generally. So they can measure the impact of different touch points to your nation brand, and they can calculate how many positive associations need to be created to counteract the negative associations and to achieve that target brand naught. So they started with this rather complex looking crisis management matrix. The x-axis shows negative comments around COVID to the left and positive COVID mentions to the right. And the y-axis shows the net number of positive mentions upwards and the net number of negative mentions downwards. So countries that appear on the right-hand side of this axis above the y-axis can be considered the winners in terms of how their reputation has fared through this crisis. New Zealand and Macau have had the best crisis management ratios with a really clear positive in terms of international opinion, but a low number of mentions. South Korea, which you can see in that big circle at the top right, has a ratio of 20 positive mentions to 1 negative mention. And on the other end of the spectrum, down bottom left, you can see that USA and Italy have a really high volume of negative mentions in relation to COVID. The next slide, Bloom have been kind enough to zoom in on how African countries fare on this matrix. I can't cover all of the detail they've shared actually, but if you want to get in touch, I do have a full report from them and I'm happy to share it with you. So 8 African countries were mentioned when they were asked about top of mind countries that have managed COVID-19 crisis really well or very poorly. As with the majority of countries in the study, the majority of them fall on that intersection of the X and Y axis, showing that opinions are quite polarized along the Y axis. Zimbabwe and South Africa received more mentions than any other African nation, but were also the only 2 African countries with a negative crisis ratio. Zimbabwe needs 2.67 positive perceptions to neutralize the negative, and South Africa would need 1.33 positive perceptions. So on the next slide, we can see that for the continent of Africa, positive perception is mainly associated with a tiny lockdown and the effective measures that have been taken during the crisis. But bad healthcare systems and social behaviours were mentioned as the reasons for poor management, which perhaps backs up that Ipsos poll on attitudes to healthcare management. So on the next slide, what is the brand naught for Africa as a region? So the brand naught, according to Bloom, for Africa is minus 3.24, which means that you need 3.24 positive perceptions to counteract 1 negative perception in order to create a neutral perception of the place brand of Africa. And that compares to a global brand naught of minus 1.8. So there's some work to be done. And that brings me to the can brand nations recover and what must they do to recover? So can place brands recover? I'd say yes. Next slide, let's look at Kenya's recovery from the Westgate shopping mall incident back in 2013. Recovery is always possible, and what we can take from Kenya is that one element of that recovery has made the country more resilient in the face of this new crisis. They focused on developing domestic tourism revenues, and according to a Quartz Africa article, these accounted for 66% of their tourism revenues in 2019. So now, as they reopen for domestic tourism before they look to their international markets, they're in the right place to rebuild those revenues. Around the world, we're seeing that destination marketing organizations are pivoting away from marketing to international or away visitors and encouraging their own citizens to rediscover the attractions of their own city or their region or their nation. We run our annual City Nation Place Awards and have been overwhelmed this year by the number of communication strategies to showcase their new approaches. We're announcing our finalists today, and so I can refer to a couple of examples. One that particularly stands out on our next slide is from Lithuania. Recognizing that there was a growth in gastronomy tourism around the world and that Lithuania's food culture was beginning to re-emerge following years of Soviet rule. So with the help of experts and with more than 10,000 Lithuanians taking part, voting on their favorite dishes, They launched a national menu map on Google and a 3-day travel menu. And this is now working to encourage domestic tourism, but inevitably is also going to work when they can welcome international visitors back to the country. There is, of course, a danger in only discussing tourism product when we should be discussing the whole place brand, the whole nation brand. So just this last slide from Bloom, and it shows that not every brand dimension is affected in the same way. The brand naught affects the willingness of people to visit, to live, to study, or to buy at a different level of intensity. And the most sensitive aspect for Africa is the willingness to live and work, which was negatively impacted twice as much as the global average by COVID, according to Bloom's research. The research suggests that the willingness to visit is far more resilient and only requires 1.88 positive mentions to every negative mention. So I guess the first thing I would say is that for place brands to recover, they need to focus on the data. You need to gather as much data as you can from your own resources, from your key public and private sector stakeholders, and from international resources as well, to really understand the challenges that any recovery strategy must address. Based on the data that I've shared today, my second point would be that it's not enough to inspire a neutral perception of your place brand. You need to encourage positive perceptions in order to counter any negatives, and indeed be prepared for any other crisis that's yet to come. My slides are not moving and I need to move forward one more slide. I think because somebody went, there we go. So we've seen an ocean of advertising campaigns around the world with very similar messaging. Dream about travel, we're here when it's safe for you to return, all of those sorts of messaging. But the countries that we believe are going to achieve stronger, more resilient recoveries are those which are also A, actually doing the right thing in terms of responding to COVID, and B, sharing those stories. We saw that New Zealand has a stronger reputation coming out of this crisis. We've seen increased storytelling from countries such as Costa Rica around how their scientists and manufacturers are delivering practical solutions that will help their own country and the rest of the world. Another finalist in the City Nation Place Awards is the city of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. So both Lithuanian examples today. The destination marketing team at Go Vilnius recognized that citizens and policymakers were demonstrating really creative ways to continue with life as normal as possible under COVID. The city's International Film Festival went digital in a matter of 2 weeks instead of being postponed. A local photographer swapped his tripod for a drone to be able to keep taking family portraits during the quarantine. The local tech community hosted a virtual hackathon to come up with ideas to respond to the pandemic. A local startup developed and launched an app promoting well-being and health. Vilnius International Airport, as you can see in this photo, even transformed one of its aprons into a drive-in cinema. And the entire city centre was turned into an open-air cafe, allowing their hospitality sector to thrive safely. They hosted a mask fashion week. They started an Art Needs No Roof project to allow local artists to exhibit while the galleries remain closed. They had so many examples of creative thinking. So Go Vilnius adopted a strategy of talking about this innovative and resilient approach, positioning Vilnius as a model city for the new normal, building perceptions of the city's creativity, and in the process, earning media coverage around the world. I've been reading how scientists in Sudan, in their universities, are collaborating with colleagues around the world on the vaccine. I've been reading how the African Union has been collaborating on economic measures, but I actually had to really search for those stories. I think the world feared for Africa at the start of this pandemic, but in many places the response has been quite strong, and you can see that the positive actions should be made more evident. So I'd say that recovery is going to depend not just on advertising or communications, but on actions, on walking the walk and talking the talk, and then talking up your achievements. Recovery across all aspects of nation brand reputations will need great leadership, strong collaboration between public and private sector, and really active citizen engagement. And it's going to come with good governance and positive collaboration. I'd love to share more stories, but we're all under time pressures today. You can read loads of case studies of best practice at citynationplace.com. And in November, our global conference is focusing on how place brands can be the focal point for economic recovery. So maybe we'll see some of you there, and I'm happy to take any questions. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for the presentation. What we're going to do, we're going to move straight on to communication, and we're going to call upon Dr. Darlene Renier Bianeke, who is the immediate past president of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa and a senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Her topic will be based on what is the role, what role can public relations and communication play in helping city, region, province, and country government to communicate better in times of crisis. We've heard a lot about how perception and reputation is a matter that requires urgent attention. If Dr. Bianeke is ready, please, the stage is yours, okay? Now we're in the world of virtual community, so we say what we say. Okay. Dr. Bianeke?
Thank you, Victor. I hope you can all hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Victor, can you please put up the slides? I'm not allowed to share, so I can't share my screen with the slides.
Okay, all right.
You're able to share the screen now.
There we go. Your slides are up.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.